It's so nice to be here, to finally be here. I mean, finally in terms of the years it took to get me here, and also in terms of the long car rides that both Miss Tayari and I sustained to get to this moment. It made me realize why I don't get to Montclair that much. My goodness, what was it, 2.5 hours?
It was 2.5 hours.
Yeah. So I'm honored, and me and Miss Jones go back, so I'm excited that we're going to get to talk to each other in public. I'm going to read a chapter from Another Brooklyn, and it's chapter 7. And for those of you who don't know, it's the story of 4 girls coming of age in the Bushwick section of Brooklyn in the 1970s. And the person telling the story is Auguste, and she's an anthropologist looking back on her life. That year, every song was telling some part of our story. We crowded around the small radio in Sylvia's room and listened. When Gigi's mother wasn't home, we went there after school, waited while Gigi used the key that hung from her neck to unlock the door. There was no couch in the one-room kitchenette, so we sat on the floor around her close-and-play record player, the volume turned down low. We leaned in to listen as Al Green begged us to lay our heads upon his pillow, and Tavares asked us to please remember what they told us to forget. And Minnie Riperton and Sylvia hit notes so high and long, it felt like the world was ending. The world was ending. We had been girls wobbling around the apartment in Gigi's mother's white go-go boots, and then. Little pieces of Brooklyn began to fall away, revealing us. We envied each other's hair, eyes, butts, and noses. We traded clothes and shared sandwiches. Some days we laughed until soda sprayed from our noses and hiccups erupted in our chests. When boys called our names, we said, "Don't even say my name." Don't even put it in your mouth. When they said, "You ugly anyway," we knew they were lying. When they hollered, "Conceited," we said, "No, convinced." We watched them dip walk away, too young to know how to respond to us. The 4 of us together weren't something they understood. They understood girls alone, folding their arms across their breast, praying for invisibility. At 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, we knew we were being watched. So we warned each other about the shoe repair on Gates Avenue, how the old man who reminded us of Geppetto made you wait on the hard wooden seat in the little booth so he could steal glances at your legs and bare feet. Take someone with you, we said. Don't wear dresses when you go there. He'll offer you a quarter to see your panties. When we weren't practicing walking in Gigi's mother's shoes, we were little girls in Mary Janes and lace-up sneakers. When the heels wore down or the soles flapped away from the tops, we were given $1 and sent to Gates Avenue. Just a little, the man said. Please. The quarter held up high and gleaming between his thumb and pointer finger as we shook our heads. As we shook our heads no, and embarrassed tears we didn't yet understand sprang forward. The pastor at my church comes up behind me sometimes when I'm singing in choir, Gigi said. Don't sing in your church choir. Or if you sing in it, go to another place while you sing. And she whispered how she was the queen of other places. Close my eyes and boom, I'm gone. I learned it from my mother, she told us. So many days you look in that woman's eyes and she isn't even there. But when she is, Gigi said, she reminds me to go to Hollywood. Tells me I'll be safe there. We didn't know to ask, safe from what? Safe from whom? We thought we knew. We promised her she'd be more famous than anyone ever was. We told her no other brown girl had her strange eyes and crazily long hair. We believed ourselves when we said, that's what Hollywood wants, and I can't wait to see you on television, and you'll be more famous than Diane Carroll. Don't trust the altar boys, Sylvia warned her, if you're the only altar girl. When she opened her mouth to sing Nina Simone's Just Like Tom Thumb's Blues, our throats throbbed, our teeth locked together. Sylvia lived deep inside those notes, halfway hidden from all of us. They got some hungry women there, man, they'll make a mess out of you. You have to be a singer, we said. You have to. After law, Sylvia said. We tried to hold on. We played double dutch and jacks. We chased the ice cream truck down the block, waving our change-filled fist. We frog jumped over tree stumps, pulled each other into gushing fire hydrants, learned to dance the loose booty to Sly and the Family Stone, hustled to Van McCoy. We bought T-shirts with our names in zodiac signs and iron-on letters. But still, as we slipped deeper into 12, our breasts and butts grew, our legs got long. Something about the curve of our lips and the sway of our heads suggested more to strangers than we understood. And then we were heading toward 13, walking our neighborhood as if we owned it. Don't even look at us, we said to the boys, our palms up in front of our faces. Look away, look away, look away. We pretended to believe we could unlock arms and walk the streets alone, but we knew we were lying. There were men inside darkened hallways, around street corners, behind draped windows, waiting to grab us, feel us, unzip their pants and offer us a glance. We had long ago lost our razor blades, and none of us had ever truly stopped chewing on our nails, but still, I and I and I and I, we chanted. We and we and we and we. We hand-songed, down, down, baby, down by the roller coaster, sweet, sweet baby, I'ma never let you go. Because we wanted to believe we were years and years away from sweet, sweet babies. We wanted to believe we would always be connected this way. Sylvia, Gigi, and Angela had moved far past my longest fingernail, all the way up my arm. Years had passed since I'd heard my mother's voice. When she showed up again, I'd introduce her to my friends. I'd say, "You were wrong, Mama. Look at us hugging. Look at us laughing. Look at how we begin and end each other." I'd say, "Can you see this, Mama? Can you?" Thank you.
Jackie, thank you for that beautiful reading from this very beautiful book. I teach at Rutgers at Newark, and my students, all of them, they're probably like between 18 and 25 now. They love you. They love you so much that I drop your name as a shortcut to like increasing my own credibility. But I have a question for you. You know, much is made of the fact that Another Brooklyn is your first novel for adults in 20 years. Mm-hmm. And I read the first novel for adults, Autobiography of a Family Portrait. My question for you is this. What do you make of that distinction? Is there a distinction? What does it mean?
I love how your nails match my cover. She is so, and you know, she always looks like this. This is not just a moment, it's a movement. It's interesting. It's of course a sales tactic, right? So young adult is not that old. That genre is not that old. But when I think about it, I think about the age that I'm writing in. Even though in Another Brooklyn, the girls are for the most part 13, 14, 15, it's the story of a woman looking back. And you can't do that in children's literature, right? The child has to be in the moment, and that's what makes it the young adult perspective or the middle grade perspective or the picture book perspective. They don't have this future sense of themselves, and Auguste does. That said, as we know, there's so many books that are targeted to young people that anyone can read because we've all been adolescents, and the essence of being a young person doesn't change, even as the technology and all of that does. So it's really pretty much about who publishers think will be attracted to the book, but I don't think I do a whole lot of thinking about it when I'm writing. I don't try to censor myself around what I'm trying to say, but I definitely think of perspective a lot. I knew this was going to be an adult book because I knew the person telling the story was going to be an adult.
But then I think, though, just to push back a little bit, like you say that adults read young adult literature because everyone used to be an adult. Everyone used to be an adolescent. But I think all of us know when we were adolescents, we read a lot of grown people's books.
Oh.
And we're totally into them.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking a lot because it's true that, this whole YA thing is such a thing now. But I don't quite know what it means about what we think about ourselves as readers.
Or what we think about. I don't think adults read that much young adult literature. I mean, I think, with books, like people like John Green and the Harry Potter books, there were books that kind of made
Jacqueline
adults.
Woodson books.
Now I think adults are going back and reading some of my earlier stuff, but they wouldn't touch that. I think in the 90s and the early 2000s, they were like, oh, you write for children, when are you ever going to write a grown-up book? Whereas, no one ever says to grown-ups, when are you ever going to write a children's book? But I think there is this disregard our country has for young people that they also tend to have for their literature sometimes. And it wasn't until Another Brooklyn that people were like, oh, let me go. Oh, no, Brown Girl Dreaming, actually. Yeah. And I think with Brown Girl Dreaming, because it was a memoir and people were 50-something and said, oh, I know that time that she's talking about, then it started unlocking more of my young literature, my young adult literature.
Okay, I could see that. And because I thought a lot about it, but another thing I thought about when I read this book, that this is a book that's a story of 4 girls. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, what is it about the story of friendships of 4 when it comes to women and girls?
Mm-hmm. I was trying to think of other ones.
Well, I mean, there is, if you want to watch TV, there's 4 women in Sex and the City.
Oh.
There's 4 women in Waiting to Exhale.
Oh, yeah, because I was trying to think, Brewster Place was a lot of women. Then when you think of something like Zula, it's 2 women and the whole posse. But I do think, how
many women are in Little Women? I meant to Google that in the car. 4.
4.
Yeah, I thought so. I just couldn't name one of them. There was one I was missing. Yeah, there's 4 women in Little Women. There's a thing about the quartet, but I don't know what the thing is.
I think for me, it's that whole thing that 3's a crowd, right? When there are 3 people, 2 can get closer to each other than the others, but when there's 4, it kind of spreads it out in a different way, and then if one drops off or dies or something,
got 3 left.
You got 3 left.
Now, as you were told in the introduction, I live in Brooklyn now, but I'm not a Brooklynite. I'm born and raised in Atlanta. I'm a Southerner who's always mouth agape at Brooklyn. And when I read Another Brooklyn, I realized the Brooklyn I live in isn't the Brooklyn you grew up in. What? And I started thinking of you, though, when I read this, because I also read Brown Girl Dreaming, and I never thought of you so much as a hometown girl in that way. But you are, aren't you? Yes?
It comes out sometimes. Mess with my children, it comes out. And it's funny, I wrote Another Brooklyn, because the neighborhood that I grew up in, Bushwick, was quickly changing. I remember hearing on Leonard Lopate, he was talking about, he was interviewing a woman about tequila, and he's like, you mean it's like the Bushwick of tequila? And I'm like, oh man, we're on some next stuff now.
What does that mean? But what does that mean?
That means it's hip and new and small batchy in this way. And becoming something very different. And so I started writing. I had written a piece in Brown Girl Dreaming called Bushwick History Lesson. And it's where I talk all about the history of Bushwick before German mothers, before Dominican daughters, Don Quinceañera addresses, and just like all the people who came through Bushwick and how, it was settled, but one of the people who settled it was black. Like all this stuff I didn't know about the neighborhood. And at the same time, after my mom died, she left me the house in Bushwick. And so I was going back and forth to Bushwick, realizing that I had grown up in this neighborhood that was on the edge of white flight. Black people were coming in through the Great Migration. Latino people were coming in, and it was becoming this Black and Latino neighborhood. And white people were moving out. They were coming to Jersey. They were going to Long Island. And, so it was they were going upstate. It was that neighborhood on the edge of white flight. And quickly changing then, and now it's this neighborhood on the, what's the opposite of white flight? Like, when the grandchildren come back to the neighborhood, the grandparents
like a boomerang thing.
Yeah. So now the neighborhood is very different, and I realized that the people coming to the neighborhood had no idea of the history of it, right? For me, I was growing up, it was the ghetto, then it was an underserved community, then it was inner city. Now I'm sure people would call it urban, but maybe not, because now it's, you know, urban is that catchword for blacks living in a place. Oh. So I really it was very intentional to write a biography of Bushwick. And so what Another Brooklyn is this biography of a place that existed exactly how it existed in that book. I went back and did a lot of research on it, and then laying over that, a novel of 4 girls, you know, creating these 4 girls. But it was really important for me to put that neighborhood on the page and have it remembered, because I think we spend so much time walking the land and not realizing, not acknowledging who walked there before us. You know, New York is the Lenape, and Columbusing it, right? We came along and we discovered Bushwick. It's like, no, there were people here before you, right? And I wanted those people remembered.
One of the really moving passages in the book is when Auguste is a little girl, they've moved there, and the neighbors, the white neighbors, are moving away, and the woman is in her station wagon, and she's looking back at her house as she's leaving, and it's like she's looking back almost like her house has been destroyed by a natural disaster, like she's like after the storm. And the storm is Auguste, this little girl and her little brother. They are the storm that she is fleeing. That really resonated with me. There are a lot of images that really pop in this book. I mean, the first time I read it through, I'll never forget the image of the little boy who's wearing the little white high-top shoes that little kids wear, and the toe has been cut out so that he can, you know, wear them.
Foster kid, yeah.
But it completely captured what it is to be a little kid and to be poor. There's those high-top shoes that are such an emblem of sweet babiness, and then cut in that way.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, Jackie is bad. That's what I thought when I read that.
Oh, man. You know, and I don't know how, I mean, because your book is the same thing. It feels like you're having the experience of reading it, and you're also watching the movie of it. There's a way in which you lay the images down that I feel like I'm right in the space with the people. And I'm thinking of, you know, Silver Sparrow, first of all. Like, I felt like when I closed that book, I just wanted to know what happened next. And I would always get annoyed when people would ask me, well, what happens next? I was like, you know what happens next, the book ends. But just the idea of how you create these characters that stay with you and you long to continue a journey with them. And I feel like for me, it's just that they live with us, right? And they're in our heads, and they get and they grow up. And I remember seeing photos of kids with shoes, and I'm sure at some point my shoes were probably flapping away, and or you know, kids with torn up shoes. And kids, I remember it was actually down south that I saw a kid with those white shoes and the toe cut out and the toes hanging over. And it broke my heart. You know, and that must have been about 10 years old. And I think this is also a writer's thing. You walk through the world and it's like your skin is pulled back, right? Every image is just coming at you constantly. So you can't look away. And so you see that and you know the whole narrative, right? Just by looking at one foot. And I think in Another Brooklyn, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of these small moments of maybe some memory I had or something I imagined or something that, like Biafra. I mean, we were spoon-fed Biafra as the, you know, eat all your food, there are kids starving in Biafra. And it wasn't until I grew up that I really understood the history of why Biafra existed and, you know, why that famine existed. And but in that moment of childhood, it's just the image that either grown-ups give you or you get in your head some other way.
You mentioned down south. I'm from Atlanta. I'm from down south, but we don't think of it as down. We just think of it as home. But I'm from Atlanta, and I noticed There are two things I want to ask you about with Down South. There's this passage, I wish I could find that. This is not my original copy, so it's not marked up. But how do you say that everybody, all kids had a fear of being sent to Down South, and there were all these different Down Souths.
Sent home.
Yes, wherever that was. Like you could be sent to Down South, but your Down South might be Jamaica,
Dominican Republic, or Greenville.
And so it was this interesting moment because I was just thinking that in Atlanta, was there a Down South for me to be sent to? But no, we're already there.
That's so interesting.
And so what does that mean about New York as a space, as a home that's not home for everybody?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I never thought about, because you weren't part of the Great Migration.
No, we didn't migrate. We stay home.
Which is its own thing. That's, a whole other narrative, right? The ones who stayed and the ones who left. And I mean, it's the narrative we're having now, right? Like, do we stay in this place that's getting more and more oppressive, or do we leave? And if we leave, what does that mean for the ones who don't leave, who are going to stay and fight, or who can't leave? Like, I feel like this has been a lifelong question for me, and especially with going home, because I still call it home. I call it Down South. I call it home. My mother all her life called it home. My grandmother all her life called it home, and my mother lived, from over half her life, no, more than half her life in New York City, but. You never get home out of you. And so many kids on my block were part of the Great Migration, but also, again, came from other countries too. And there was always that threat of getting sent back, I think, for everyone.
And you were born South, yes?
I was born in Ohio.
The South.
Buckeye. So yeah, I was born in Ohio, and then when I was a kid, when my mom and dad separated, then we went down south, where my mother's parents were.
In
Greenville, South Carolina.
South Carolina.
That's the South.
That is the South.
It's serious South, upstate.
So
South.
does that make you in any way a Southerner?
Oh, I'm Southern to the bone.
To the bone?
I say hi to people. I mortify my kids because both my kids are.
Your kids are New Yorkers.
Yeah, they're serious New Yorkers. But I say hello to people. I can cook really Southern, and if I'm in a room with a bunch of Southern people, my New York friends won't understand me. I definitely, the imprinting years were in the South until I was 7 years old.
That's really interesting. So, then. Would that make you a Southern writer or no?
Well, I think Ohio also claims me.
They already have Toni Morrison.
It's so funny. I don't know. I mean, I feel like that was so much of what Brown Girl Dreaming was, of being in those many worlds. I grew up Christian and Muslim. I grew up, in the South and the North. I grew up, with a single mom, and then when my mom and dad got back together, this whole other reality. So it's always that kind of which one is home in all of those different narratives. But I would claim the South deeply, and I write about the South a lot. I mean, here in another Brooklyn, I went to Tennessee because I wanted to go someplace very different than what I knew of the South. The South I knew was very landlocked, and I wanted to put them near water. So.
Now I'm going to ask you a question I'm sure you've answered a million times, but we just have to know. When did you know that you were going to be a writer, or that you wanted to be a writer? When did you know you wanted to be a writer, and when did you know you were going to be a writer?
I knew I wanted to be a writer when I was 7. And I knew, I think even from a really young age, I knew I was going to write. No matter what, because I wanted to be a writer. But I don't know at what point I began to believe I was a writer. It wasn't when my first book was published. It wasn't when I won my first award. I think it was that kind of imposter thing was always kind of out there for me. But from the time I was 7, I was saying I want to be a writer. I want to be a writer, and I just love story, and it made me, and I don't know how it was for you, but there weren't writers in my family, so it wasn't like that was something you aspired to.
For me, my family are academics, so they are not creative writers, and it was seen kind of like a hobby. I thought that for me as a girl, when I was coming up, that girls were thought to be, there are two kinds of girls, nice girls and girls that are not nice. And so girls that read and write a lot are nice. So it was like a character issue more than an aptitude kind of thing. It was like, I always say that, you know, no one ever got pregnant in the library. So that if you're writing, someone did? I think someone said they did. In the library?
Oh my goodness.
Oh my. But I felt that I was able to write kind of and develop without scrutiny.
Maybe in the nonfiction stacks. No one
Yeah. No, that was definitely, yeah, in the poetry is where that happened.
That's fabulous.
So
when did you know?
I'm completely thrown off. I can't even. I have said that thing about nobody getting pregnant in the library. I must have said it 100 times, and no one ever was like, no, me. This is like shaking one of the fundamental truths for me. Oh my.
When did you know?
I wanted to write all my life. Like, I just enjoyed it, and I would write little books and staple them.
Yeah, I did that.
Yeah, but I didn't know that I could that I could do it seriously until I was a student at Spelman College. And I met a writer, and she was my teacher, and she just said to me, strangest thing, she just said, what are you thinking about? And no one had really asked me what was going on in my mind in that way, and I began to take myself more seriously because of that. I mean, I think mentors are really important. Who are your mentors?
You know, I feel like so many of them are text-based, right? So I feel like I learned so much from Baldwin. I learned so much from Morrison. I learned so much from Raymond Carver. I learned so much from the poets I read. And I think my village, right? The people who support me while I write, who take care of the kids, are, and you know, even growing up a witness, I feel like that really taught me a lot about being able to sit still for many, many hours, because it's a text-based religion, and you had to study for many hours. And then you had to sit in the Kingdom Hall and be bored. And so that allowed me to like have my mind wander and make up stories and all of that. But I feel like I really, because I didn't, you know, get an MFA, I really felt like I learned to write by copying other writers when I was really young. I would make those little books, and I'd take a Langston Hughes poem and write the Jackie Woodson version of it. And I was figuring it out. I was finding my voice. And I have a stack of books that I go to when I'm stuck and just need to read something to get back into the rhythm of writing. You know, everyone from Carson McCullers to, I don't know, I'm trying to think what I was reading the other day because I was so stuck. I think it was a very depressing, which is almost redundant, Raymond Carver story. And I can't remember which one it was.
Yeah, I read a lot. I'm finding that lately that I'm reading less. I feel like I have to read so much kind of like for work that I sometimes forget the pleasure of just reading something for just the hell of it. I'm always aware of the task at hand.
So I have a question for you. As a teacher, how do you keep the students' writing out of your head to create your writing? You know, I mean, I remember when I used to teach, I'd have like the mistakes the students were making. I'd have to, you know, kind of flush my brain so I wasn't doing that.
I actually have a hard time, like when I do a story in class, I sometimes can figure out what his problem is, and I'll often say, oh, we have solved this one. And once we solve it, I can put it away. But if I don't solve it, if I don't figure out what the thing is that's off about it, I will turn it over in my head for years. As a matter of fact, I looked this woman up on Facebook, and I mentioned this story to her. She was like, I don't even write anymore.
Oh my goodness.
But I was like, but if you do, I know what's wrong with the story. It's the point of view. You need to make it more retrospective. And she was like, thanks. But I kind of regard them like puzzles in my head. And I actually find that talking to students all the time about how stories work help me think about my own stories.
Huh.
Because it makes me, because when I'm doing my own work, like when you're writing your own books, as you know, it's kind of like being in love. You're in love with the book. You and the book, y'all are hanging out. You're spending all this time together. But there's some certain logistical things that you need to handle. And I feel like when I teach, I'm talking about the stories in a way that's not like being in love with the story and just moving it around. And then I can go home to my story that I'm in love with and get it straight logistically because of what I've just been doing with my students.
Wow, that makes total sense. I cannot teach.
You don't think so?
I tried it. I won't say it out loud.
But
we're being filmed.
Both my parents are teachers, and my grandmother was a teacher. So I do think there's something to that whole genetic thing. I cannot write full time. When I have a lot of time, I start doing other stuff. I start going to the gym, just like hanging out. But you do write. You write every day?
I try to edit some every day. Or try to, like today, I was working in the car a little bit. But I do try to keep going forward. I'm not always successful, but I do try.
Okay, one more question before we open it up. Then what for you is like a great writing day, like a good day? You wake up, what happens?
I wake up, the family leaves. So everyone's out, my partner and son, they leave at 7:30. He takes the school bus, so she gets him to the school bus and goes off to work. Then Toshi, our daughter, leaves at 6:30, between 6:30 and 7, gone. So by 7:31, the house is mine, except we have a German Shepherd. Take the dog for a walk, have some coffee, and I sit down. And a great day is when I read over what I've written the day before and start editing it, and it jump starts me to keep writing. And if I could do that for 3 or 4 hours, it's a great, great day. And then I find stuff to procrastinate and do that and clean up. Actually, I have to do the breakfast dishes before I go down to my office. Just because if the kitchen is dirty, I'm gonna be thinking about it. And then I know that if I'm deep in the story, I have to come home by around 2:30. And just home inside my brain because I have to go back to being mom again. And if I wait too long, I'm mad at my kids, right? Because I want to still be in the world and my characters and they're interrupting it. So I have to be strategic about when I stop and exhale so that when they come home, I'm in a better mood. But if I have a bad writing day, they know it.
You compose by hand, on the computer, perhaps a typewriter?
I wish a typewriter. I should have stuck to a typewriter. You use typewriter?
I use typewriters. That's my thing.
Wow. Electric or?
No, manual.
Like with the...
Yeah, that's the best part. After you write a whole line, you get rewarded with that little ding, slap it back over.
Oh my goodness, that's so impressive. That is so impressive.
So, computer?
I start by hand, and then when it starts coming fast, I go to computer. I type like 110 words a minute, so I could type. My friend's like, "You look like the Matrix," and then back to by hand, so back and forth. So I have a bunch of notebooks, and I'm not organized enough to have one, so I'll start something in one notebook and not be able to find it, and have another one, and back and forth.
How did you learn to type 110 words a minute?
I took typing class when I was in 7th grade. We had Miss Barbara. We had an inner room in the school, so it was windowless. And so we'd learn, A, S, D, F space, and then she'd turn off the lights, so we couldn't cheat, right? And then we'd have to type in utter darkness, and then she'd look at our, the quick brown fox, nope, and we learned. She made sure we learned, and they don't teach it anymore. Like my kids can't type. And then I was a word processing secretary. That's how I paid the rent while I was trying to write books. So I was at the keyboard all the time, and just faster and faster.
Okay, that is like pretty amazing. That's great. Well, I think by now, we should open it up to people here who have questions. I will not monopolize you. It's all yours.
And I won't monopolize you.
Yes, ma'am?
Thank you both.
So nice to see you.
I read both your books some time ago and loved them both. Right now, I am thinking about Toni Morrison's Norton lectures. And going back to your books, I think both of your voices are really, really different from Toni Morrison, like in Paradise. And I think that may be a generational thing. I want to ask you if that is a proper question. I mean, should I be asking you questions to place yourself with Toni Morrison? And if it's not a proper question, why not?
That's great. You want to start?
I'm happy with any conversation that involves Toni Morrison. I really am, because I think about Toni Morrison all the time. I mean, her writing and her ideas form the way that I understand my own writing, and in some ways even the ways that I understand my own life. So I feel that it's a proper question for me as an individual, but I do think that part of the reason why her work resonates with me so is that we are both Black American women writers. I think that I can't really understand a setting in which it is improper to ever ask anyone about Toni Morrison. I really believe that, though, because she is so singular and so important in the shaping of our modern American canon. Mm-hmm. So I can't imagine a room with writers where one wouldn't talk about it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that it is true that our writing, I do believe that for both of us, if not for Toni, we wouldn't exist. Toni Morrison, we wouldn't exist the way we exist today. And our writing wouldn't. And I think
Toni
that...
the editor or Toni the writer?
The writer. My first book by her was The Bluest Eye. And I read it when I was in I think I was in the 6th grade. And it was because, I was constantly looking for mirrors. Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop talks about the importance of kids having both mirrors and windows in their books so that they have reflections of themselves on the page as well as windows into other worlds. And there were, growing up as a person of color in this country, especially in the public school and the private school system, you have libraries where there are many, many windows and very few mirrors. So when I saw that copy of The Bluest Eye, and it's that really bad cover where it's the grown-up lady with the wig holding the white doll. Ooh, it was creepy. But I picked up the book and I read it, and my memory of it was that in the end, Pecola Breedlove got blue eyes and lived happily ever after. And then I read it again as an adult, and I was like, oh, she changed the ending. And then for a long time, I thought there were two versions. There was a children's book, and there was an adult book of the same story. And that book scared me into telling the truth. I mean, I felt like she gave me so many green lights to say that nothing you can write is wrong as long as you're telling your story, and just broke all kinds of ground. And I think it allowed for me to play with narrative form, to not be apologetic about writing about Black people, to be able to, in the narrative, show how much I love Black people, and not be afraid of the story without the happy ending, as long as there is hope somewhere in the book. And that was a huge lesson for me as a writer of children's books, because I knew that I wasn't going to write these books where everyone lived happily ever after. But as a child myself, I knew I needed hope somewhere in the book, and so those books had to provide that. But I completely agree about the point of you can't even begin to have the dialogue about writing, especially as Black women, without acknowledging Toni Morrison.
And see, for me, The Bluest Eye was published in 1970, which is the year I was born. So me and The Bluest Eye showed up at the same time, but which meant that by the time I was old enough to read it, it had been around, her other books had been around. And also, because I grew up in Atlanta, Southwest Atlanta, I lived in a predominantly, basically exclusively Black middle class area. But so we had a lot of books, that was part of the mission of, since I was born in 1970, part of the mission of the 60s had been like, we were going to get books to these kids. So I didn't really find Morrison like, oh my, you know, black people write books. I knew that. But what Toni Morrison did, for the Toni Morrison book that meant so much to me, it's what I read in college when I read Song of Solomon, because I came to understand the complexity, that's a nice word for it, of the black bourgeois experience, a way that is both, that is critical of it, but also compassionate. But I feel that I identify more with the characters in that book in the ways, the women who are trying to figure out how to make their way with all this crushing respectability. I felt like it explained so much. It helped me understand my own life, not just as a writer, but like as a human being, how I came to understand why I feel the way I feel.
Thanks for that question.
This is to both of you. I'm from Savannah, okay,
Oh.
so I understand the whole down south thing. I have a question, because when you're reading both of your books, and you bring back memories that I thought I couldn't even remember that I had. You know, like when you talk about, you know, the hand clap songs and, you know, the jump rope songs, you know, like the sweet, sweet baby, I'll never let you go. And I was like, oh my God, like all of a sudden it unleashes something in you. And you remember being on your street and on your block and your friend and pigtails and all that craziness. And I'm like, is it something in you as you're writing that just has to come out, or is your memory that good? Because I can't remember what happened like 2 days ago. You know? And it's just like, it's so clear and vivid to me what you have brought. And I'm thanking you for it. But at the same time, like, where do you get it?
You know, I remember saying to my mom, telling my mother something that happened when I was 3, and she's like, you don't remember that. And I was like, yeah, I do. And she was so kind of, you know, freaked out by it. And I think part of it for her was that this idea as a grown folk, you know, kids are kind of invisible for a long time, and you could do and say stuff in front of them, and they're not taking it in. And then here's this girl, I think I was about 8 or 9 at the time, who was saying, no, this happened. And at first she was like, who told you that? I'm like, no, I was there. And after that, like, it changed how she and my grandmother talked around me, like everything, because they got it that I was this sponge. And in my family, my siblings, I have an older brother and an older sister and a younger brother, who will call me and say, you know, when we were living on Madison Street in 1972 and this happened, do you remember blah, blah, blah? Because they know that that's how my mind works. And I see it as a blessing and a curse, the way my memory works. I think part of it is that when I read something, or when I look at a picture, or when I have a conversation, I'm still in touch with many of my childhood friends who didn't leave New York. It is constant unlocking of memory. And I think then that's what writing does for other people, right? So I say something, and because it's so deeply specific, you get it. And it unlocks your memory, and your memory of it is probably a little bit different than mine. But it is that place where we meet as writer and reader. And I don't know, I just feel like I hold on. I have way too much junk in my head, including bad song lyrics and commercials and interactions that people don't even remember anymore, and I'm still kind of mulling over them and fretting. And I think that's why I write. For me, part of the writing is a catharsis. It's like putting it out into the world and being able to let go of it a little bit.
Hi. I wonder if you could talk a bit about the book Feathers, which is one of the shortest novels that covers so many different relationships and so many different issues. And when I'm a school librarian and when I share it with my students, you know, I say just get ready because you're traveling back in time to when I lived. So for them it's historical fiction. For me, it's actually, you know, a documentary, so it's fine. But it's just remarkable, and I would love to hear where it
Thank
came
you.
from. Thank you.
So Feathers is the story of Franny, who's a 6th grade girl. Takes place in 1970. And she's living in this area. I know exactly where it is. It's on your way out to Kennedy Airport where the Black Cowboys exist. I never name it, but I know exactly where the spot is. And she's living, there's a bridge that separates the black community from the white community. Her older brother, Sean, is deaf. And he has, but he lip reads. And this year that she's writing about, a white kid comes into the classroom. It's an all-black classroom, and suddenly this white boy appears into the classroom, and the kids start calling him the Jesus boy and making fun of him, and they have all these arguments. Well, Jesus wasn't white, so why are you calling him the Jesus boy? Everything from class, economic class arguments, stuff around race to religion. Some of the kids are very devout, others are non-believers. Franny doesn't know what she is. So it takes on all of this stuff. Meanwhile, the mom has had a number of miscarriages and is pregnant again. It all takes place over this one winter into spring, and it was inspired by Oscar Wilde's story, The Selfish Giant. In The Selfish Giant, there was this kid who, the giant was, back in the day, you could write books and have the title tell you everything about the story. So it was about a giant that was selfish. And he builds this wall around his garden, and the kids break in and they're able to play again in the garden. Anyway, he meets this kid, and it's so interesting because if you know the history of Oscar Wilde, there's a whole other thing happening in this story when you deconstruct it. But when I was a 3rd grader, I didn't know a lot about deconstruction or Oscar Wilde. I just knew I loved this story. And so there's this kid who's crying in front of this tree, and the giant lifts him into the tree, and the kid hugs the giant. The giant becomes kind and befriends the kid, and then the kid disappears, shows up many years later. When the giant's really old, and the kid has wounds on his hands and the feet, and the giant says, "Who hath dared to wound thee?" Nay, said the boy, "For these are the wounds of love. You let me play in your garden once, and now you can play in mine, which is paradise." And with that, the giant falls down dead. And that's the end of the story. And this story got read to me in 3rd grade. I was devastated. And it's one of my favorite stories of all time. And I said to myself, what if I take that boy out of that story and set him down in 1970s Brooklyn, Queens, in an all-black classroom? What would happen? And so, and then the big thing that happens is, for the kids, is he doesn't identify as white. Because they keep calling him white boy. He's like, "I'm not white." And you find out why he doesn't identify as white. I'm not gonna give that away. But I just really wanted to begin a conversation, and I feel like that happens with so many of my books. I say, what if, and that book became the story of all of these kids and the way they have hope. So Feathers is from the poem "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches on the soul and sings the song without the words and never stops at all." But it was originally called The Jesus Boy, and then when I realized it was about all these kids, I changed the title to Still Winter, because in the giant, all around the country, spring had come, but in the giant's garden, it was still winter. And the book, takes place all winter. And then I decided I was going to call it Feathers once I knew it was this book about hope. And my editor didn't like the title because she said it sounded like a book about chickens. But I held firm. So that's the seed of Feathers. So it would be interesting with the kids to read Selfish Giant and then talk about Feathers.
Thank you. Just one more question.
I'm in the middle of your book right now and thoroughly enjoying it. And the reason I picked it up is because I grew up in Crown Heights and was there in this early 60s period that seems to be when this book is talking about, and could relate to so many of the images that you've used, the double Dutch and the smells and the people and the way they talked. And anyway, it was just very reminiscent of when I was like age 1 to 10. But I wanted to ask you about the influence of poetry in your book, because it's so beautifully lyrical, the imagery, the words you choose. It's like reading poetry in a sort of a prose way. And I'm very curious, you mentioned like when you have the need to read something, you pick up a book of poetry sometimes. And I was very impacted by poetry as a young person. until I took my first poetry class in college, and that was the end of it.
Well,
So-
what did you read in college?
Huh?
What poets did you read in college?
I don't know. I took a class at Oberlin College that I thought would like open my eyes to more poetry, and I decided after analyzing it like that, I didn't like it anymore. So I just loved reading it out loud.
Oh, that's
Thank you.
fabulous. Thank you. Well, you know, my daughter just had to read Another Brooklyn in her high school class. She's in high school, and my daughter is very down low about me being her mom. Like, people do not know. But she said, you know, the kids were analyzing it, and she's like, Mommy, I just wanted to say, no, that's not what she meant. Like, you know, I always think maybe they should wait for the writers to move on to the next place before they start trying to break down the literature. But, you know, until last Monday, I was Young People's Poet Laureate for 2 years. And in that position, I had to go around, talk a lot about poetry. And I also was writing and reading a lot of poetry. I mean, before that position, because of course they wouldn't choose me if I wasn't writing and reading poetry. But as a young person, I was asking about who you read, because as a young person, I was really nervous about poetry. I just thought it was this secret code of dead men. And I didn't understand it until I remember the first time I heard Nikki Giovanni's album. My mother had it, and I was like, what is that? And it completely turned me around. And then, of course, Langston Hughes and Maya Angelou and Robert Frost, like starting with those poets and then moving on to, you know, Marie Howe is one of my favorite poets. And I do, everything I write, I have to read it out loud, and it has to sound a certain way, as well as I'm very intentional about how it sits on the page. But really taking time to look at how the words move along the line on the page is very important to me. So in writing Another Brooklyn, it was trying to limn the narrative and the poetic elements of writing, as well as that nonfiction that was Bushwick.
Hi. So my question has to do with the characters that were in Another Brooklyn. So obviously, because the story is told from the perspective of Auguste, we know what she thinks and feels more so than the other three girls. Mm-hmm. But do you feel like there was more that you wanted to reveal about the other three girls? Because at the end, I was just like, wait, but wait, I need to know. What do you mean?
What did you need to know?
Just so much. I mean, you know, like, one of the characters died, but we don't really know the specifics and how that affected. It was just kind of like, oh, we heard about, oh, it's so sad.
No, you have to go back and read it.
No, I know how she died. I'm just saying, like, you know, it was, obviously I felt like with a lot of us, when we have childhood friendships and then we leave and we come back and there's a lot of things unresolved that never get settled in a formal way with closure. But I just kind of felt like, you know, I was just wondering if you felt like you left anything unsaid that you, in hindsight, you wish that
I had it revealed.
Yeah.
You know, Sylvia is on the train. She's reading the Times. She's like, she's made it. Like that. The message there is this person is fine. Like, you know, she's not. I could have put her on the train nodding out. I could have put her on the train with 6 babies around her. I could have put her on the train looking raggedy. But it was very intentional that I plopped her down on that train as this poised, you know, beautifully graying, you know, successful woman. With Angela, when Auguste is at Brown and she sees her on TV dancing, she knows she's made it. And with Gigi, when she takes that, there's a whole scene before that when those coats are spread across the chair and this child is looking out and no one has showed up for her. And then, you know, the next scene is her at this party and it's like, what do I have? And falling off and jumping off that Chelsea Hotel railing. Like, I was very intentional in terms of playing with white space. I think it's very, you know, I think one thing that, even when you look at my books for young people, it is this idea of wanting the reader to come to me a little bit, as opposed to giving everything. And so I wanted to have those 4 girls have a complete narrative, but I didn't want to spoon feed it. And so I think in the second reading, it'll be more clear. And not to say you read too fast, but for me, I think it's, there's stuff that people always tell me, oh, I missed that the first time I read it. I didn't see how you put that in there the first time. And I think that's where it's like poetry. Like with poetry, you have to read it a couple of times before it completely settles in you. So for me, by the end of it, I was like, oh, I'm so glad to be done with these girls. Like, now I know what happened to them all. But the one that feels unanswered to me is the baby. And that is Sylvia's baby. Like, that's the character that still kind of haunts me a little bit. But the rest of them feel like they're okay. I love your hair.
Thank you.
You want to take that last one?
Let's do one more. Yeah, don't leave her hanging.
Thank you. I had an interesting experience because I listened to the book. You were coming here and I was at a very busy time, so I took it out as an audiobook. And I was so struck by the music that I learned so much in my life from rock and roll and music, and you brought back great lyrics. What I wanted to ask you, though, was about the mother. I was so touched. And the refusal, the father saying, look, you know what happened to your mother. Here's the urn. And I just wanted to ask you to comment a little bit about that, her experience and how she took care of her brother.
Oh.
And, you know, I was so touched.
Oh, thanks. I love the little brother. That was one of my favorite characters. You know, I think that what I was trying to get at there was with Auguste becoming an anthropologist who studies death, and that's one other intentional thing. When you read the scene and you get to the part where Auguste remarks on some death ritual from some other culture, it's intentional. It has a connection to the scene you just read, like when Jenny's kids get taken away, and we talk about, and I think it's Ghana, where they dig a grave when the child is born. And we know that those kids are probably not going to make it. So with the mother, like Auguste has always been studying death, so it makes perfect sense that she goes to school to become an anthropologist because she has that deep, deep denial. And one of the things that I was also trying to get at, we live in a country that doesn't allow us to mourn, right? You know, someone dies, it's like 3 days off from work, and then a month later, oh, you must be over that by now. And you know, mourning takes you, and as I was doing all that researching of how other countries deal with death, you know, people get their time and they have their other ways of doing it that feels so much healthier to me than this country. So Auguste is the quintessential unreliable narrator. We know that, right? You know, for a long time, my mother wasn't dead yet. And leading the reader right into believing that, okay, her mom hasn't died, but yeah, her mom has been dead. This is why they've left Tennessee. And it took a lot of rewriting to understand the mom for me. Just because it took a lot of rewriting to understand her. And I think also going between having a 15-year-old daughter of my own and looking back at my own life at 15 and looking at my mom, having written Brown Girl Dreaming was the last book I wrote, and in the middle of Brown Girl Dreaming, my mom died suddenly. And that was part of trying to make, Brown Girl Dreaming has started off being this memoir of my childhood, and then it became this story of my mother, because suddenly that door had closed and all these questions that I was gonna ask her, I couldn't ask her anymore. But so then when 2 years later when I went in, or no, a year late, actually part of Another Brooklyn was written, the Bushwick part was being written while I was writing Brown Girl Dreaming, but the trying to figure out the mother, I think that door kept closing because it would make me have to think of my own mother. And then also Vietnam was hard to write about because my family didn't go to war. You know, my Jehovah's Witnesses are COs, so they don't believe in war. And then having to go back and do the research of someone getting a letter and it meaning to and losing their mind basically, and then juxtaposing that with the relationship between Auguste and her brother, and me having to decide, is Auguste's brother gonna die too? No, I don't. And then because I love him so much, no, I didn't kill him off.
I'm so sorry to say that we are bringing the conversation to a close because I know everyone here would ask you, please move to Montclair so we can bother you all the time. So we will be having the book signing in the front in the cafe, and thank you very much for